All right, so today we are going to begin part one of our notes on the Aztecs. There are quite a few notes to take on this group of people, so we're going to divide it up into two sections, but this is part one. And I am going to warn you, I do not speak Spanish, and there are several very difficult words in this, so you're going to have to kind of bear with me. At times, I might have to sound out a few words because they're not words I use on a regular basis, and I'm not as familiar with them. So let's begin. So the Aztec group probably originated as a nomadic tribe of mostly hunters and gatherers from northern Mexico. That's not where they originally settled, and that's not where you would have placed them on your map, but that's where they started. And then they moved towards central Mexico and settled down in the 13th century, or at the start of the 13th century. And their name comes from the name of their homeland, which was Aztlan, which meant white land. So they were a nomadic tribe. Think back to the start of the year as we did some of our vocabulary in the early civilizations. Nomadic means they don't have a permanent home, they were always on the move. Mostly because nobody else wanted them around every time they tried to settle. They were not very good at making friends. Basically, if people came around them or got too close to their civilizations, the Aztecs would capture people and then kill them. So if you saw the Aztecs moving into your area and you were a tribe at that time, you would probably want to run them out as well. So everyone kept trying to get rid of this group and push them further and further away. Nobody wanted to be neighbors with the group of people that killed everyone that they didn't like. So, where did they locate? Basically, as they started moving, um, they had this. There's this legend, basically, that the Aztecs were told about how to settle their city. And again, I have to sound out this name. But one of their gods, his name was Huitzilopochtli. I believe that's how it's pronounced. They believe that he told them to build their city wherever they found an eagle devouring a serpent on top of a cactus. And so they wandered off to find this, and finally they found it on the border of Lake Texcoco, and they decided to drain all that swampy land there and start building their capital city, which is Tenochtitlan. Um, and this image that you see right here is actually still seen on the Mexican flag today, in the center of the Mexican flag, to honor their heritage. So they started building their empire. When we talk about these ancient civilizations, with a lot of the other ones that we'll study throughout the year, we're talking BC or right at the, first few hundred years. This now we're actually in the 1400s. We're not really as far back as, say, ancient Egypt, like we just studied. But in 1428, under their leader Itzcuatl, the Aztecs started forming an alliance with a few other groups to help them conquer other rivals in the area to gain a little bit more power. At this time, they got a new leader. His name was Montezuma, and he took power in 1440. And pretty much everyone liked him. He was a great warrior, a strong leader. He's considered the father of the Aztec Empire. His name's pretty synonymous with it. Anytime you think of the Aztecs, you think of Montezuma there. And so their capital city, at its height, at its peak, at its most popular time, had more than 140,000 inhabitants. And so it was the most densely populated city ever to exist within Mesoamerica. So when we think of all these civilizations, they had the most populous, or think of it this way, most crowded cities. That's where their city was thriving. As far as their type of government, it was ruled by an emperor who would live in a palace within the capital city, and then he would have a noble placed in charge of each city, kind of like a mayor, maybe, for example. So he's the ruler, but obviously he cannot get to every single city. And so he's going to have somebody who he trusts, somebody who's wealthy, that will be a part of, a resident of a city that will report back to him. And that person's in charge of running that city and making sure everything goes well, but also telling the emperor if they need anything or if they need help. They were supposed to report to the emperor. Usually they didn't. Most people just or most city states just ruled themselves. They did what they thought was best for their people, and the emperor didn't really care as long as everyone still honored him and were loyal to him. They did have a written set of laws for all people. No matter what city state you were a part of, there were a set of laws you had to follow. And if you broke a law, your name, the crime you listed, and the punishment were recorded for the emperor to see, for all the government officials to see. And the punishments were often very harsh. Remember, this is a group of people that was run out because they would kill their neighbors if they didn't like them. So if you broke a law in their town, often a punishment included death. They did, however, have a one-time forgiveness law. Basically, if you committed a crime and you did not want to be punished for that crime, if it was one of these major crimes, you could go to a priest and confess your crime. And if you did it before anyone found out what you had done, they would grant you one-time forgiveness. So if you go tell him, hey, I messed up, I did this, he can forgive you and say, all right, you will not be punished this time. But if you ever break another law, then you will be punished. So I guess in a sense they had some mercy, but for the most part it was pretty harsh. For the religion, they were, like all the civilizations that we really study for most of the year, polytheists, meaning they believed in many gods, not just one. They believed that their gods, for the most part, worked together. For the most part, got along, wanted the best for the people, and looked out for the people. They also believed that their gods needed rest, that you couldn't tire out the gods or overwork them, that they needed to take breaks just like humans do. So for that reason, sometimes they had multiple, like there were two gods of war so that they could take breaks. Their gods had families. They lived in, homes within their realms, that kind of thing. So they almost envision their gods more like humans than some of the other civilizations, possibly making them more relatable. In fact, cities would have these huge temples and palaces and statues to honor the gods. Um, but a big part of their religion, that is something that the Aztecs were known for, was the rite of human sacrifice. Meaning, in certain religions, you have altars or things that you would sacrifice or give up at the altar. In the Aztec religion, it was not uncommon for a human to be sacrificed. Somebody who is considered holy or pure or whatever it might be would be killed as a way to honor the gods. And that was seen as an honor to be able to do that. The Aztec calendar was based on the solar cycle of 365 days, and they would have rituals roughly every 260 days. And that was super important in their religion. Everything they did in order to honor their gods, make the gods happy, as you'll see with many civilizations. If people believed if the gods were angry, then you would be punished. And if the gods were happy, then everything would be all happy for you as well. They did believe that if they were not able to keep their gods happy for a long time, or if the gods stayed angry, that the entire world would end. So it was important for them to keep their gods happy. As far as the afterlife, they did believe in an afterlife. They believed that when you died, you would be assigned a job that you would have to do in the afterlife to help specific gods. And these jobs or these things that happened to you in the afterlife depended on how you died. For example, if you were a warrior who died in battle, then you could be turned into a butterfly or a hummingbird, very peaceful type things. If you died of natural causes, then you had to serve the Lord of the Dead, who was pretty gloomy and horrible, and that was considered the worst afterlife job that you could have. So, obviously, from that, you could kind of take from it that it was definitely considered far superior to die as a warrior in battle than to die of just natural causes. So, they prided themselves on having warriors, on having strong civilizations, and people that were ready to go to war and willing to die for their tribe. As far as the social classes, we have our social pyramid. Remember, at the very top is the one with most power, and at the very bottom is the least amount of power. They did have a very strict social pyramid and a strict caste system. So obviously you have the emperor at the top. Nobles would be the ones that live in luxury. They're very wealthy. They get to have these grand lives. Down at the very bottom, you have servants and slaves did most of the work. Poorer people would not have had slaves. They had to do their own work. Um, but then you have skilled professions in the middle. That would be your soldiers, your doctors, priests, merchants, traders, craftsmen, the athletes, the engineers, the builders, matchmakers, these kind of things that were respected professions. Um, the easiest job that you could have was a trader because, as I said, nobody wanted to be around this group. They were fearsome. They would capture and kill people that they did not get along with. Everyone was afraid of the Aztecs. So basically, you just traded with them so that they wouldn't hurt you or kill you. So pretty much, traders just had to go in and demand what they wanted, and it happened. As far as children in school, they did have a system of free education, and they believed very strongly in education and the importance of it. So everyone went to school, even slaves. Every single person was expected to go to school. However, they did not mix schools. So they were separated by social classes and gender. So slaves would not have been at the same school as the merchants' children or as the nobles' children, that kind of thing. And boys and girls would not have been in the same class either. School was considered pretty tough. There was no recess, no relaxation. It was for educational purposes. It was very difficult. The type of breaks that you would get would be learning songs and dances, but they were not silly, fun songs and dances like the wheels on the bus. They were things for religious ceremonies. So things that you had to be able to say in order to participate in your religion to make the gods happy. Boys would be trained also in hunting and farming and fishing and fighting, things that they needed for survival and for their own well being and to help care for their family. And girls, likewise, were trained how to be good mothers and good cooks, and how to sew and how to take care of the home and things that would help them take care of their family. There were some schools, though, that would train kids in specialized professions, like learning more about medical stuff or how to build certain things so that you could develop a skill set and become one of those specialized professions. As far as marriage goes, men typically got married around 20, women around 14 or 15. Those are kind of average ages. It wasn't like the minute you turned 14 you had to get married, but around that time. The upper class marriages would be arranged by a professional matchmaker. That was their job. They would find the perfect match for you to marry. Not always like, oh, we think you guys will get along really great, matchmaker, but maybe most beneficial for that civilization at the time, for your families, for like a business deal, or for your skill sets that you had. Lower class marriages were often arranged as well, but by your parents. So, girls, your parents would set up a mate for you to marry. However, girls had a little bit of a say in this. Um, if a parent came to you and said, "Hey, we've decided you have to marry this boy across the street," a girl had the right to say no for certain reasons. As far as the ceremony goes, it was not like our current weddings. A bride's family would have a huge feast that would last for several days so everyone could celebrate. And then the bride would be carried piggyback style by the matchmaker to her new house. And that's where she would be given to the groom for their marriage. And for the official ceremony, they would tie their coats together in front of the hearth, and that would make their marriage official, literally tying a knot in their coats. So, where we hear the expression like, oh, so and so tied the knot, meaning they got married, it actually comes from the Aztec, tying the knot. One thing that the Aztec did have that not many ancient civilizations had was they allowed for basically divorce. For certain reasons, women could request a divorce, and if you got divorced, you could receive half of the goods owned between you and your husband, which was very unique because in most civilizations and ancient civilizations, one, divorce wasn't allowed, but if for some reason you were separated from your husband, women had no rights and couldn't own property and couldn't do anything. So if you were separated, you were left completely empty handed. Not in the Aztec civilization. You would literally get half of what belonged to you and your husband. As far as warriors and war, so again, fierce tribe, scary group of people. So their soldiers were highly respected and highly trained. They were at war kind of all the time. Again, that's why people didn't want them nearby because they were always attacking and always ready to fight. And they just about never lost. They were fierce. They would often use their enemy captives for their human sacrifices. I know I talked about having pure sacrifices, but it didn't always have to be. It depended on the ceremony or the ritual that was taking place. Sometimes it was just we have to sacrifice a human, and so they would take enemies from war and hold them hostage and sacrifice them for their gods. Soldiers that had fought most of their life could then retire in comfort and wealth, basically. If you lived long enough, if you did not die in battle, you could end your career, you could retire and be taken care of because you were so well respected. Clothing wise, they had very uniquely colored and designed clothing that would show your rank and your importance and who you were within the tribe. And then military heroes actually got like extra stuff on their uniforms that would show like extra gemstones or extra embroidery, extra designs that would show their importance and what they have done for the tribe and the civilization. And then we have slaves. That was the bottom group, remember. Their slaves were made up typically of Aztecs. Um, not could sometimes be other groups, but not often. With many civilizations, we talk about prisoners of war being slaves. Aztecs didn't often have prisoners of war. They killed them all. So slaves were Aztecs, and there were two main ways you could become a slave in the Aztec civilization. The first was punishment for a crime. If you committed a crime, remember I said you could be put to death, but you could also just be turned into a slave, and that's how you will pay back your debts because they didn't have prison. Or your family could sell you into slavery in order to pay a debt. So if your family owes somebody a bunch of money and they can't pay it, it's like, okay, we'll give you our kid for a while and they'll be a slave. And once your debt was paid off, then you would be free again. And you could go back to your parents or go live life. Slaves could marry other slaves. Slaves could also marry free women as well. And kids of slaves were considered free citizens. So if a slave had a kid, their kid did not automatically become a slave. They would be taken care of by the slave owner until the slave was freed. If you wanted to get rid of your slave, like if you had a slave and you no longer wanted them, it wasn't just like punishment and death. It was you had to be able to publicly show 3 examples of disobedience. 3 ways that this slave had not done what they were supposed to, and that's how you could get rid of them. So slaves could escape on the way to the public humiliation. That did happen. So if your slave owner was trying to take you into town to prove that you were disobedient, sometimes that was the perfect example to book it and try and get out, and you could only be stopped by your master's son in that case. So that is the end of part 1 of our notes on the Aztec civilization.